What is up, Cougar Nation? Welcome to the latest episode of the Hype Train podcast. We have a lot to get into, a little bit of a depressing weekend for BYU fans across the country, but we have a Hype Train podcast episode nevertheless. I am not Joe Wheat, Hunter Miller, filling in as the podcast host this week. Joe vowed that if BYU were to ever go 10% or worse from the three-point line in a basketball game, that he would quit the podcast that week. And so we are without Joe tonight, but I am joined by Trevor Levitt, as always, and Jackson Payne of the Deseret News. We figured if Joe's not going to be on, we needed to get a real insider on with us tonight. So Jackson, thank you for taking the time to hop on. BYU's number one source, number one beat reporter. So it's an honor to have you, the two-time Hype Train guest of the year.
And now AP voter.
You could say that the first created the second, you know? I mean, they looked at my resume and they're like, Hype Train podcast guest of the year, like stamp that. Yes. I got to get some hardware to put in the background for my little background setup I have here on Zoom. But yeah, it's been too long, guys. I mean, I feel bad. Every time you guys ask me to be on, there's always like a conflict. And yesterday at the basketball game, two different people came up to me and were like, when are you going on the Hype Train pod again? And I was like, oh, like, didn't have the heart to tell them that it's like my fault that it's been a couple months, but we're back. We're back like we never left. So it's going to be back.
The irony is that I think you are the most like well-known member of the Hype Train podcast show. Cause like Trevor and Joe and I don't think could really go many places and have fans be like, hey, let's get an episode this week. But
well,
Jackson,
did you guys know that Joe used to walk laps around the Marriott Center?
I did not know that. You're telling me for the first time.
Apparently
Jackson,
that was a big deal, I hear.
Jackson, first question. How many spots did you drop BYU in your AP poll following last night's debacle of the first half?
Well, luckily, if they beat UConn, all's forgiven. So, dude, I just gotta like – It's been a while to doing the poll every week. Like I've only done the preseason poll in the first week, but like watching all these games and breaking it down, looking at box scores and everything, it's just like it is so much fun, but it's a grind. Like it's been just trying to see. It's like, okay, BYU had a bad half against Delaware, but then they came back in the second half. But also Kentucky lost at Louisville, like, and then other teams struggle or other teams succeed. Just like. It's too big brain for me, man. It's been a grind, but we're having fun with it. So I haven't dropped BYU yet. You know, I've in both polls, I've put them one spot ahead of what the actual poll has been. And I still have BYU fans giving me a hard time. Like, come on, like you're being too hard on them. Let the bias show. And I'm like, look, this is my BYU degree right here. Okay. Everyone knows I went to BYU. Okay. But I have to be somewhat like, I know I'm on the Hype Train pod right now, but I can't get my vote taken away because I got BYU up to number one after struggling against Delaware for a half, right? Like there's a process to this. There's an order in all things, and I'm trying to follow it. But also, like, BYU's awesome this year, so it's fun to rank them high because, like, I mean, how many people have gotten to put BYU in the top 10 of a ballot before for basketball? Like, that is a badge of honor that I will wear. Thank you, Kevin Young, for giving me that opportunity.
We get to do it every single year, whether they're good or not, here on the Hype Train ballot. It's top two, and they're not number two each and every year. No. But I mean, last night, certainly a tale of two halves. We won't spend a ton of time on it, just because, in my humble opinion, it felt like a classic game where it was kind of threefold. Like it was the classic look ahead spot where BYU's got a tough test this Saturday in Boston against a top, 5 or whatever they're ranked right now. Jackson, you'll obviously know more than I would in the AP poll where UConn sits. You're taking on, they were back-to-back national champs just a couple of seasons ago. You're looking ahead to that matchup, for starters. Second off, you're in a spot where you're playing a team that's 0-2. In Delaware, they had just lost to a Division II opponent. You're probably taking that game as serious as you would a YSA State basketball game, if not less serious if you're on the BYU roster. And third, it was this situation where it felt like for the first 25 minutes of that game, BYU couldn't hit, Utah Lake with a basketball. Meanwhile, Delaware seemingly couldn't miss. It felt like the basketball gods had made a ruling, and the judgment was that G League players are not allowed to play college basketball. And some of the shots Delaware was making felt like it was punishment to BYU for their recruiting practices in the G League. But what say you guys? Where's the panic button? Is it even out of the closet yet and unlocked from its case, or is it just a hey, these weird things happen in college basketball and there's nothing to worry about?
Yeah, it's just weird happenstance. To your point, Hunter, I think any film that was watched this week was against guys wearing a UConn jersey. There was probably no Delaware film study going on. I do have to laugh a little because classic jinx, or reverse jinx in this case. Like, I had kind of tweeted that, what is going on with Richie Saunders? He can't hit anything from beyond the arc, and he then rattles off 6 straight makes, right? So it was one of those things where, looking back on the game, it was actually a lot more encouraging, I felt like, just considering how poorly the entire team was shooting. To have a guy like Rob Wright who could keep them in the game almost by himself for a half until everybody was kind of able to catch up from there. I felt like that was a good sign. Hunter, you mentioned in the group chat, is it a concern that the big three of AJ and Robert Rob Wright and Richie, if they scored 70 of the 85 points, like, is that a problem? The fact that they shot that poorly and they still contributed that many points, like, I just think this team's still gelling. The depth pieces are going to come along as well. We've thought this exact same thing last season at this time, where the starting 5 felt pretty good, but then there was just this huge drop off from there. And depth ended up being one of BYU's biggest strengths as the season progressed. So to me, it's a big nothing burger. I think they're clearly looking ahead to UConn, and they still spotted Delaware a 13-point lead and still won by 17. So,
yeah, I mean, it's November basketball, right? Like, this is a weird month for college basketball. Delaware just lost to a D2 team and knew they were coming to play the best player in the country, potentially, in AJ Dybantsa. So I think they were definitely fired up for an opportunity like that. And BYU, Kevin Young, I think Mitch Harper asked him in the postgame. He asked, do you think your guys might have been looking ahead to UConn? And Kevin Young was very candid. He was like, yeah, maybe. I mean, and to get that kind of honesty, like, that's pretty telling. Like, yeah, I think that first half, maybe they were sleepwalking a bit, thinking, all right, we're going to Boston this week. Like, that's the main prize. But yeah, I mean, I think the biggest thing with that game is BYU finally unlocked Richie. He was sick against Villanova. He was okay against Holy Cross, but he was finally hitting shots in the second half against Delaware. He had 6 threes. Rob Wright went nuclear. Just to have those two guys kind of hitting their stride going into a game like UConn is a big deal. The defense is really concerning. I think they missed Kennard Davis defensively yesterday, and it felt like Delaware was getting whatever they wanted in the paint for a lot of the game. But those are things that are going to come with time. Like, I think this BYU team will be better defensively than they were last year, just because they're so much more athletic and they have a lot more length. But at the same time, I don't think defense is going to be like one of their calling cards. Like, they're going to be able to hit shots. They're going to be a really dynamic offense. Eventually they'll be deeper because right now the bench isn't really giving you anything, but I don't think defense is ever going to be something that they can like hang their hat on. And maybe eventually that'll be the case. Maybe Kennard Davis becomes the next Mawat Mag and just becomes the island defensively. You can just lock up your best player. But right now, it just defensively, it just feels like something's not working. And that's what the non-conference is for, though. This is why BYU is scheduling tough teams like UConn, like Villanova, like Wisconsin, like Clemson in this non-conference period, because they have to be as ready as they can be for Big 12 play. And obviously, Delaware is not a team that you would think like, okay, BYU is going to grow a lot in this game, but that's just how it happened. And you got to just accept it for what it is. And there's no need to hit a panic button. It's something to monitor, right? Defense, depth. But the fact that Richie was hitting shots The fact that Robert Wright was unbelievable yesterday. I mean, those are things that you just take and you're like, okay, now BYU. I don't think it's one of those things that you look at those performances and you're like, okay, BYU's got a shot against UConn. That's going to be one of the biggest games the program has played in years, and this is their opportunity to make a statement. And you feel better about that when you have Richie hitting 6 threes and Rob Wright almost having a triple-double, and then just the mere fact that AJ Dybantsa is on your team. So, yeah, it's gonna be a fun Saturday.
How do we feel about BYU's front court depth? Because it seems to me, if there's one area for concern, is when Keita's off the floor. You know, who is that guy that is going to come in, rebound at a high rate, defend the rim? You know, I think Boscovich is the de facto backup center, even though he kind of plays more of a forward type role. Xavier Staten, you know, didn't get any run last night. You got obviously Trevor's guy, Kadeem Mboop. It was, you know, a lanky guy, but again, kind of plays more of that perimeter defense, not necessarily going to guard the paint. Is there any worry there for, hey, if Keita's not playing 30 minutes a night, you know, we've got issues? And, you know, to your point, Jackson, BYU's defense, you know, struggled for a majority of that game. And I think a lot of it was just Delaware hitting some crazy shots, but a lot of it was kind of being able to get where they wanted on offense as a result of having to play a lot of help defense whenever anyone would drive to the paint, because there isn't that rim protecting presence when Keita's not on the floor.
Yeah, I think I don't know if it's a concern. I think there is so much growing that has to take place with the guys that are behind Keita. Like Keita by himself, I think, has more experience than those other three combined playing for BYU. And as you mentioned, Hunter, like Boscovich plays like one of the taller threes, like small forwards in college basketball. He likes to stretch the floor, you know, and play kind of at the top of the key or, you know, in the corner or whatever. He still has to kind of get used to playing within his role in Kevin Young's defense in this case. But when you've got a guy like Xavier Stanton and Boop, like the encouraging things for me is the fact that they are showing flashes. They just need to grow and experience the game at this collegiate level. And then we're going to start to see kind of those pieces fall in line. I just, in Boop, like Stanton, they're incredibly athletic. Jackson mentioned the length that this team has. Like they're both like long guys. It's understanding positioning. It's understanding where they need to be in relation to everybody else on the team, playing defense, and, you know, better understanding like collegiate concepts and ball motion and all these different things. It's just going to come with time. We've been spoiled a little bit with Barrett Bachmeier as a freshman coming in and just seemingly picking up as if he had been at BYU for 3 years already at quarterback. It's not always like that for some of these freshman guys. So I think as they get more comfortable and they get more games under their belt, like college basketball, you've got like 30 games before you even hit the postseason. I think by the time we hit conference play, those guys are going to feel pretty good.
Yeah, I'm incredibly concerned about the front court depth. I think if Keita were to get hurt, that would be almost disastrous for this BYU team, because right now, like, Xavier Staten has a really high ceiling and he's going to be really good. But right now he's a long-term project. You know, it's kind of like Rudy Gobert when he first got drafted by the Jazz. They're both tall, rim protecting types, potential elite defenders. But right now he's not ready for the college game at that level, right? Like he's flashed at times. He's come in and made some plays, but he's not a guy who can give you big time minutes at that position in the Big 12 right away. Boscovich has been borderline unplayable at times this year. Like Trevor said, he's a small forward, and you know, as when BYU ran with him as a small ball center last year at times, it worked out. Like they did some cool things offensively, but it's not really working right now. I don't think he's great on the boards. He's not hitting shots consistently enough. It's just I'm down on Boscovich. Maybe he can turn it around. And then Mboop, like Kadeem he's one of the more freakish athletes on this team. And I really like the prospect of him being a small ball 5 and having some creative lineups around him, but he's so raw as well. Like, I think he's more day one ready than Staten is, but right now it's one of those things that I'm kind of keeping an eye on. Like, what are they going to do when Caba's out of the game? Because if you want to beat BYU right now, you go in the paint, I think that's kind of the key. And it'll be interesting to see how UConn attacks that area. And at the same time, like, I think AJ he's so good on both ends of the floor, but if you have to rely on him more in the paint, that could be dangerous health wise, and the wear and tear down there. It's just with him trying to help defend down low, and just, I don't know, man. I'm a little worried about that, and hopefully they can develop that and get some more depth going through the non-conference. But like I said before, if Keba Keita were to get hurt, this BYU team it's kind of like when Brandon Davies had his thing in 2011, like BYU never really recovered from that with Jimmer. And I just feel like that could be a similar scenario where, like, if Keba gets hurt or if he suddenly becomes addicted to fouling and you can't have him on the floor late in games, like, that could be disastrous for BYU. So keeping an eye on it, but for now we're just going to see what happens.
Yeah, I was going to mention that same thing, Jackson, where it feels like if Caba's not in the game, AJ's your best bet at a real rim protector. And it's a credit to AJ that you don't get a lot of superstars coming in day one and being like, yeah, I'll play both ends of the floor with every bit of effort that I can give. And, it's a testament to him that he is one of those guys that's a true two-way kind of player. He's going to defend at a high level, and then he's going to give you everything he can on the offensive side as well. But I worry, with a guy like that, you don't want to have to ask him to be your primary rim protecting player and, your top defender, as well as the superstar that's going to carry you on an NCAA tournament run. So I think, you hope that guys like Mboop can develop, maybe Boscovich can, step into a larger role and, improve his game, and that pray that Keita can stay healthy, right? Because, heaven forbid an injury happens there, and I think BYU's in a lot of trouble.
And I want to preface this by saying I am in no way comparing AJ to Caleb Lohner. Just do not flip farm this. But it reminds me of when in 2021-22, when I think Richard Harward had his weird thing and didn't play that year, and then Gavin Baxter got hurt, and they were suddenly really thin in the front court. They had to ask Caleb Lohner to do a lot more kind of as a big and to be a rim protector and play down low. And luckily, Foose came on that year, and that was awesome. But they asked Lohner to do a lot of those things down low that he wasn't really used to, and it kind of threw off his season. Like, the Caleb Lohner saga at BYU is so interesting, but I feel like that really tanked a lot of it was him having to do stuff down low that he might have not been used to. And look, AJ is so much better than Caleb Lohner is, and I'm sure he would fare much better than Lohner did in that point. But my point is, when you have guys in established roles, you don't want to have to ask them to do those kind of bigger things, especially in a much more physically demanding spot like down low as a rim protector. So I really hope they don't have to rely on AJ in that way, because I feel like that would take some of the wind out of his sails offensively. But we're going to see. It's a long season, and hopefully they can develop some of that depth in the front court, because right now it's a little dicey. But like I'm saying, I'm not comparing AJ Dybantsa to Caleb Lohner. I need to make that so clear. Please. I am not getting sent held right now.
He's not comparing. Please don't say that he was comparing them.
Can AJ play tight end?
Don't clip this.
BYU belt. Please do not clip this.
Shout out BYU belt. That is my guy. I love that man. I would go to the ends of the earth for BYU belt. Thank you for being a fan. Thank you for having the greatest profile picture ever.
We'll pivot on over to some football now. But before we do, I want to mention that we on the Hype Train podcast are presented by Wilner and O'Reilly Immigration Law. Immigration law can be overwhelming, but with Wilner, O'Reilly is here to help. With 26 years of experience and a former immigration officer on their team, they've earned a reputation for excellence, serving actors, athletes, major companies, and families. They speak 10 languages, Jackson, including Spanish and consultations. And or including Spanish, and consultations are always free. And now, just for the Hype Train listeners, they're offering priority free consultations. Go to WilnerO'Reilly.com and mention the Hype Train when you reach out. Wilner O'Reilly, peace of mind when it matters most.
Here's a question: Where do you put Wilner O'Reilly on your AP poll, Jackson?
Dude, Wilner O'Reilly is they're up there, man. That's a top maybe 6, 7 around there, right?
Good answer. I like that.
They definitely leaped Kentucky after last night.
They definitely jumped over Kentucky.
Last thing we'll say about last night's basketball, it was a phenomenal night of college hoops. You had Wake Forest and Michigan went to overtime. You had Louisville taking down Kentucky on their home court. You obviously had the BYU game as well. There was another, which game was it? Oh, Florida State was an awesome basketball game. And then you just had Army absolutely boat racing Army on Veterans Day on a Coach K appreciation since he coached at both schools. It was a fun night of college hoops.
That was my favorite thing that happened last night. Just the fact that Duke played at Army. I don't care about the game.
Yep.
Just the fact that a power team went and played at Army is so awesome. Just one of those like cool college basketball things that like kind of makes you smile, right? Like, wow, Duke went to Army. That's wholesome. And then they race them on Veterans Day.
I found out, like, I was watching and I verbally, like, out loud to my wife was like, I don't know if I've ever seen Army's basketball court until right now. Like, you have some that you're like, oh, go ahead.
Army has never made the NCAA tournament.
Which is crazy because they had Coach K for a while.
So they qualified for it once in 1968, but they turned it down to play in the NIT.
I thought you were going to say because like the Vietnam
was a
War
common practice back then, but like it's one of those things. It's like I don't think like Boise State and Nebraska, neither of them have ever won a tournament game, but then Army has never even been to the tournament. So
I thought
whoever wants to be the Army savior and take them to the tournament, that'd be a cool story someday, but it's not going to happen.
I thought it was going to be one of those things where it's like they got invited in 1968, but because of the Vietnam War, they unfortunately had to turn it down. Really cool.
Army made it in 1943.
Which do you like better? The playing on like Navy airplane carriers, or do you like these blue blood programs actually going to these military schools and playing? Because like when they play on the carriers, it was always like Michigan State versus North Carolina. Like there was never actually like any military part of the game aside from where they were playing it. But to your point, I do think it is very cool that Duke was like, hey, we're going to go to Army. We're going to be at West Point. We're going to actually play a military school. And it was a bit of a unique thing that I thought was really fun. Unfortunately, they absolutely wrecked them on Veterans Day of all days.
It's so sad, but I'm a sucker for like a novelty event, like a novelty visit, like when a power team plays a mid-major or a G5 team. Like, look, I know BYU probably shouldn't be scheduling G5 road games anymore, but like I thought it was kind of cool they went to East Carolina this year. I thought it was kind of cool they played at Wyoming last year. Like, it needs to stop. Don't do it anymore. But like when it happens, as long as BYU wins and gets the job done, it's like, great. Yeah, that was fun. Like it's kind of fun to be a big fish in a small pond. And it was cool to see like Duke, like the Duke basketball team in a smaller gym at Army and especially like to honor Coach K. Like that's really cool. Like I wish BYU would kind of lean into some of that more history stuff. Like my dream is for them to play like a Kresimir Kosic Classic and play it in the Smith Fieldhouse and have it be a smaller event and wear the throwback jerseys. Like that would be awesome. Play like Weber State in the Smith Fieldhouse and make it a whole event and only let students in. But it's never going to happen, but I can dream.
They played in high school gyms for a decade, Jackson. I think they are ready to they need a break from that. That last night was the worst loss for the U.S. military since the Battle of Little Bighorn, in case you're keeping score at home. Football. I know we don't.
Not the first time Army's been involved with the Duke. That's for sure.
Football. I know we don't want to really talk about it because a perfect season came to a screeching halt in Lubbock, Texas. Just want to get your thoughts. We won't spend a ton of time on this because we want people to listen. And I think if we go on for 30 minutes about one of the most depressing moments of the last 24 months as a BYU sports fan, people are going to start to tune out and find other YouTube videos to watch. But I do want to get your thoughts. What went wrong? Is it fixable? How does this impact your outlook on, not only are we talking playoffs and Big 12 championship aspirations, but even just the remainder of the regular season, because there's 3 games left to be played. A couple of them are looming pretty large here in the next couple of weeks. We'll start with you, Jackson, just your overall thoughts on the game, how it played out, what went wrong for BYU, and where do we go from here?
Yeah, it wasn't a great day. I think on a stage like that, and given the circumstances, you would have hoped that BYU would have shown up more, and only the defense did. BYU's played on these kind of big stage games pretty regularly over the past few years, and for the offense and the special teams to show up just completely scared was kind of alarming, considering the regularity in which they're playing on these bigger stage games. The defense was great. I mean, defense travels. To give up only 29 points to hold him to the red zone defense was awesome. But it's one of those things. It's like BYU's been great the past 2 years, but there's still a way to go to be the king of the Big 12, right? The gap between BYU and Texas Tech was pretty stark. I think it kind of exposed BYU's lack of depth in terms of like skill players. But I think a lot of that had to do with them using 7 guys to block 4 guys. But then you see a defensive line like Texas Tech's, and then you see BYU's, and it's like BYU does not have a playoff defensive line. BYU has a playoff defense, but the D line is just not living up to standard right now. And so it's one of those things. Like, I think that was probably, all things considered, the worst case scenario for BYU this past week. But at the same time, like, I like to be an optimist. I like to look glass half full, as I have a stroke saying that. And I think this is kind of like, BYU's been terrible in November in the Big 12. They're 2-7 in November. They beat Utah at the Horn, and that was a bad Utah team. And then they beat Houston in kind of a meaningless game. That was a bad Houston team. So BYU has never beaten a team with a winning record in November. They have 3 huge games down the stretch. TCU is dangerous. They're reeling. That's gonna be a kitchen sink game for them. And then you got to go to a really good Cincinnati team at their place, and then UCF. Who cares? I'm just kidding. But at that point, like, inertia should give BYU the win. But it's one of those things. It's like, maybe it was important for BYU to get their doors blown off by Tech in order for them to kind of have that fire under them to go down the stretch. And maybe, like, Kalani's really good with his back against the wall. And so I hope this is kind of what rallies them to maybe step it up a bit down the stretch. The defense has been doing its job. Like I said, the D-line is a little concerning, but I think Bear is such a psychopath, for lack of a better term. Like, he's just so dialed in that he's not going to get punked twice in a row. It's Lavelle at night. They haven't played at home in a while. I think they get the job done against a good TCU team. And then by that point, Tech is in the rearview mirror. And then I know I'm rambling, but like, in terms of a potential rematch, something that I always cling to, it's really hard to beat a team twice in the same season. It's just, you see it in the NFL all the time. Division games are always weird. If BYU were to match up with Tech again, it would be more of a neutral site game, because there would be less Tech fans in Dallas than there were in Lubbock, and there would be more BYU fans in Dallas than there were in Lubbock. So that makes it more of a neutral site game. And BYU you would think that they would change up their game plan a bit, and it would just be, it's a whole different set of circumstances. There would be a lot of pressure on Tech. Like, hey, everyone expects you to win. So BYU's got to get their job done and do their part down the stretch. But I think BYU's still in a good position playoff wise. They control their own destiny, which after a loss like that, that's a great silver lining. But it's one of those things where it's like, it changes your perception of what BYU can do in the playoff. Where at this point, it's like, if BYU makes the playoff, it's just going to be, BYU made it. It's like the Lavelle Edwards bowl game philosophy, where it's like, all right, guys, we got a bowl game. What a great accomplishment. We're just going to mail it in, and just, we're happy we got to do this. And that's kind of how I feel in the playoff, where, like, you're going to go at Georgia, you're going to go at maybe Texas Tech again, or you're going to go to some other school and potentially get killed again because, the depth isn't there in some areas. But just enjoy the ride right now. Maybe BYU figures it out. They upset Tech in the Big 12 title game, but it all starts on Saturday. They got to beat TCU, and that's huge.
Yeah, I think we found the one place on the face of the earth where there aren't BYU fans, because that felt like the lowest attended game from a BYU fan standpoint. Like the aerial views of the stadium was like one tiny little corner, whereas in games past, it's like seemingly 30% of the stadium.
Yeah, I was at Iowa State, and people there were saying it was the least BYU fans they'd seen since like 2019. And Texas Tech, they said, was like half of that. So yeah, there was just BYU had no sort of love there, and the crowd noise was a factor. And like, there's going to be a ton of Tech fans at Arlington if BYU gets there, but also there's going to be a ton of BYU fans. So I mean, just
more of a probably 60-40 split there. Trevor, your reaction to the game, and where BYU fell short in your opinion.
Yeah, no, I think between what I saw on Saturday and what, I heard throughout the week, Jackson, you mentioned obviously the crowd noise, like Aaron Roderick talked about it yesterday in one of his interviews, just felt like they really struggled with the crowd noise, like getting play calls in and then players missing their assignments. And I think you take all of that, you throw in some really just poor drops from the receivers. Parker Kingston has that muffed punt right at the beginning of the game. Will Farron, who has been nails for the better part of his career, like he misses. I think the most disappointing thing about Saturday's game was not necessarily that BYU lost. I think going into the season, with the questions around Bear Bachmeier and Jake Retzloff leaving and not knowing exactly what we had in the offense, and the defense seemed good, but who knows after losing guys like Jacob Robinson and whatnot. I think most people would have penciled Texas Tech as a loss, and so like the outcome wasn't necessarily surprising. It was the most disappointing part was it just felt like BYU lost their identity. They've gone their whole season up to this point 8-0, playing clean football and keeping games close, and the defense, not making a bunch of mental errors, and the offense, playing mistake free. And like you guys both mentioned already, like the defense showed up. Like the biggest shame about that 29 points is it didn't feel like the effort that the defense gave really should have reflected in 29 points given up. It was just that they were just on the field all the time because the offense just couldn't do anything, or they were turning the football over or what have you. And so the key to this week is just getting that identity back, like getting back to winning football, enforcing your will on the other team, not making mistakes while allowing the other team to, trip over themselves. And for me, that's what I missed the most about this last week. And in a rematch, I would imagine that they're probably a lot more focused on being who they're supposed to be and not getting too outside the moment and not making these, kind of boneheaded plays. But that for me was the toughest pill to swallow. Was not necessarily that they lost. Like if BYU had lost by, it was 26-29 or whatever the case may be, I think we all live with that. But just leaving that game and having everyone be like, who in the world is this team? Like, you've got people now that are like, oh, BYU's going to lose 2 more games this season just based off of how bad they looked in one game, despite their like resume suggesting that they really probably should win the rest as long as they continue to play the way they're supposed to. So just having them get so far away from what's made them great this year was a bummer, but I think they can right that ship.
You both are, I'm sure, familiar with the great Bleacher Report quote graphics that get put out anytime athletes say something crazy. But it's heavily NBA, but there's a few other sports mixed in there. I believe the Hype Train and Twitter account tweeted this out, but there's a great one of Jared Allen talking about being in the playoffs after a big loss. And the quote is, "The lights were brighter than expected." And to me, that perfectly encapsulated what happened to 2/3 of the BYU football team. And it was evident from the very first snap, where you had the offense just couldn't move the ball. I think Bear, for the first time all season long, got pretty rattled. I was forcing throws, didn't quite know where to go with the ball. You had Parker Kingston muffing the punt after the defense forces Tech into a 3-and-out, and you see Aliasera gets a big sack. You had Sam Vanderhaar absolutely shanking punt after punt. You had Will Farron missing field goals. You had wide receivers dropping passes. It just felt like a game where everyone, and you can even on the defensive side of the ball, defensive line wasn't great. And then you had, for the most part, the defense was good, but you even had like Evan Johnson making an uncharacteristic poor ball judgment and, giving up big plays. Basically everyone outside of Jack Kelly and Isaiah Glasker had their moments where you're thinking, what's going on? But for the most part, defense was good. And so I'll give them benefit of the doubt. And 2/3 of the BYU football team that took the field on Saturday looked like the lights were too bright, that the moment was too big. They spent all bye week thinking about this game, that it was going to be on College game day. You had Pat McAfee and Nick Saban, in the crowd and firing up the Texas Tech students at ESPN's broadcast prior to kickoff. You had a sold out stadium with the striping, in a difficult place to play. Texas Tech was wearing their special Patrick Mahomes ice uniforms. Like, it just felt like those uniforms sucked, by the way. You just had a situation, I think, where you had BYU players that were overthinking every little thing. They got into their own heads. They had, 13 days to think about this game. And it seems like they spent every waking moment of those 13 days over analyzing exactly what was going to happen. And they just failed to execute. With that being said, the silver lining, Jackson talks about the glass half full. I don't leave that game on Saturday feeling too terrible because of everything I just talked about, where you had special teams that might as well have not come. You could have saved on plane tickets and hotel rooms and just not brought anyone from the special teams unit. You had an offense that couldn't move the ball. It looked like portions of it looked like 2017 LSU offense. You had, all these players that were making these mistakes, and yet it was a 13-point game at halftime. BYU was, in the game well into the third quarter. It didn't feel like it was out of hand until we were 40 minutes into that thing, despite BYU playing one of the worst games I've seen them play in a while. So with that being said, you take care of business. BYU's still in the driver's seat. They still control their own destiny. You beat TCU on Saturday at home. You get your mojo back. You go on the road to Cincinnati. That's a game you should win. Then you have UCF at home, senior night at LaBelle Edwards Stadium. That should be a win. And then you go see Texas Tech again. And I have a hard time imagining that game would go as poorly as this game did for BYU on Saturday. Jackson talked about it. You're not going to be, it's technically a neutral site. You're still in Texas, but you're going to have a lot more fan representation in Dallas than you would in Lubbock. You're going to have the film. It's tough to beat a team twice in one season, let alone twice in basically the span of a month. I think BYU, if they can take care of business this Saturday, I think you can still be a playoff team, and a playoff team that could, maybe make life difficult for some of these other teams that have championship aspirations. Now, I do think this was maybe a wake-up call in terms of expectations that, hey, BYU probably doesn't, make a run in the college football playoff. I think you saw the difference between a real, playoff contender versus a borderline playoff team. But that's not to say that BYU couldn't go on the road to one of these schools. They couldn't go on the road to an Indiana and not make life difficult. And so I think that is kind of where my expectations lie for BYU right now. The good news is you still control your destiny. You're not in one of these situations like Utah finds themselves in, where you need to win out and you need all these other things to happen. If BYU just takes care of business for these next 3 weeks, it's a championship berth at least. And then we're talking about, okay, well, does a BYU team with 2 losses, both to the same team, one of those losses was in the conference championship game, is that an at-large playoff team? I think they're certainly in the conversation. I don't think the committee is going to punish teams because they made their conference championship game. So I think there's real conversations to be had in that regard. But let's say BYU does take care of business and upsets Texas Tech in their second meeting of the season. Now you're looking at the best BYU football season. You're still looking at the best BYU football season, in 3 decades. So, but first you got to take care of business this Saturday, home, TCU. Trevor, I know you watch a lot of film. You watch these games. Your first reaction to looking at the Horned Frogs, what they've been able to do this season, and their quarterback, Josh Hoover.
Yeah, Josh Hoover has been Josh Hoover's good. Josh Hoover is very streaky. I also didn't know this until I watched him more closely against Iowa State, but he also throws with a gloved hand, and I've never loved that. It just looks a little funky, especially when things get cold, like it will at LaBelle Edwards Stadium on Saturday. He's a talented guy. TCU starting running back, they just released the injury report. He's going to be out for this game. He had 15 carries against Iowa State and looked pretty good there, but I think it's Kavion Barnes. He won't be available. The thing with TCU is TCU and BYU are very similar, it feels like, in that they can keep games close, but BYU has created a habit of winning those games, whereas TCU has fallen into this weird habit of giving those games away. They had like a 17-point lead against Arizona State, handed that away, handed that game away in its entirety in the fourth quarter, was up on Iowa State, gave up a touchdown drive, gave up a punt return that ended up giving Iowa State the lead, and then proceeded to turn the ball over, and Iowa State was able to kind of ice the game from there. They know how to compete. This is a team, like, the fan base is done with Sonny Dykes. It seems like a lot of their kind of team, like, fan base comment sections are littered with them wanting to lose to BYU because they think it's just another game closer to getting Sonny Dykes out of there. They're talented. I mean, this is a classic TCU team. They've got great team speed. They've got a good quarterback, like things that have given BYU fits in the past, but they're not the same team that has blown BYU out in the past. This isn't Andy Dalton. This isn't, Josh Hoover as a freshman with BYU coming off a bye in their first year of the Big 12. But they are talented. Their receivers are good. This is a game that BYU, given a home environment, given the atmosphere, the elevation, just everything, BYU should take care of business, but it's not going to be it's not going to be West Virginia. It's not going to be Stanford where, BYU closes the door quickly and then it gets kind of boring in the fourth quarter. They're going to have to play, I would say, probably a B+ or better game to get away with the win, but it's a winnable game for sure.
Well, also you got to have style points at this point. Like, the committee is watching BYU's every move now. They're kind of been put on fraud watch after the Texas Tech game, whether that's fair or not, where it's like BYU cannot afford to win these games by 3 points. They got to win by touchdowns at 10 points and that kind of thing. My thing too is, like, it just feels like BYU's never been at home this year. I don't know if you guys feel this way. It just feels like all of their home games have been, like, spaced out weird. Like, you have week one.
I was just about to mention it. It will have been a month. 28 days when BYU takes the field on Saturday since their previous home game. They were on the road, then a bye week, then on the road, then they come back. It just, and two very tough teams, obviously, at Iowa State, at Texas Tech.
It's absurd, right? Like, you look at their home games this year. Week one, you played Portland State. It's an opener. It's an FCS team. It's hard to get a lot of juice. It was the first start for a freshman. You play Stanford, also kind of a weird game. Like, that game feels so far away now. The West Virginia game was a Friday night. Those games always have a different vibe. The Prophet died earlier that week, so everyone was just kind of in a weird state. And then Jack Kelly gets hurt right away. So that was my mom's first game at LaVelle since she was a student. And mind you, her first game as a student, as a freshman, was the Miami game with Ty Detmer. So she's seen some things. And so she was like, that was kind of a weird night. I'm like, well, when Jack Kelly gets hurt in the first quarter, and then you have the Utah game, which is just, no matter where that's played, that's always kind of weird. So BYU hasn't really had like a true home game this year, and they haven't been home in a month. And so it's like, this is a great opportunity for BYU to just reset and just, you know what, it's been a long time. The grind, that's one of the tougher 3-game stretches they've ever had in program history. Utah, at Iowa State, at Texas Tech. They went 2-1 of those games, and the 2 were probably the most important 2 they could win, just in terms of, you got to beat Utah, and then Iowa State was an important win. Like, you weren't like Texas Tech, you weren't going to beat Texas Tech, right? That was going to be a tough challenge. So you won the 2 games that you theoretically were supposed to win. Now you come home, you're reeling a little bit. You have a chance to get right at home. I think that's a huge advantage for BYU. And then you can set your sights on Cincinnati the next week. And then kind of going back to what Trevor was saying about the streakiness of this TCU team, when they turn the ball over, they lose. And BYU is a really good turnover defense, right? Like, they led the country in interceptions last year. It's a disruptive defense. Jay Hill is just, I tweet the I am chaos meme like every week. Just always feels like they have something dialed up. So you have a turnover bitten TCU offense that's dealing with injuries and kind of reeling at this point against a BYU team coming off a loss, hungry at home. Defense gets after the ball. Just, it feels like on paper that should really benefit BYU and favor BYU, but just, I'm still in the camp where, like, I have TCU PTSD, where just nothing good happens when BYU plays TCU ever. And it's going to be interesting. And a quarterback like Josh Hoover, like, just from day one, when the schedule came out, or at least when BYU started going on this run, I started looking at this TCU game, and it's like, okay, it's the early or mid-November game against a team BYU should beat. They're in the driver's seat. It just, I don't want to say it feels like Kansas, but it's similar to Kansas, and BYU's got to exercise that demon. And this has been a really good year of BYU getting right and exercising past demons. They beat West Virginia finally. They beat Iowa State for the first time. They beat Utah at home. Like, it just, BYU's been good in those spots. And so it's just, look, on paper, everything's favoring BYU, but just, this is a TCU team you can't really discount. And they got to get this one, and they got to do it with some style points, because the committee will not look favorably upon a 27-21 win, it feels like.
Yeah, you mentioned this being like a reset opportunity for BYU. It almost feels like this is the start of a whole new season for the Cougars, right? Like, everything that's gone and happened up to this point has been great, but this is where you got to buckle in. You got to take care of business. You got to win these next 3 games and go into the conference championship game and forget about everything that's happened. Right? Like, the Stanford game feels like that was 2022 almost. Like, that's how long it's been. Even West Virginia feels like a lifetime ago. You got to put all that stuff in the rearview mirror. You especially have to put Texas Tech in the rearview mirror and approach this TCU game almost like it's week 1 all over again. And you got to handle business. You got to go out. You got to assert your dominance. I think this is a game where the first quarter is just going to dictate everything. BYU can't keep playing from behind. They can't keep starting slow. They started slow against Iowa State. They started slow against Texas Tech. Fortunately, you were able to come back in one of those. But even going back to Arizona, Colorado, Utah, I know, they were leading for the whole first half, but that was another slow start game, particularly for the offense. Whereas I think this is a game where you got to come out. You got to start out on top. You can't keep putting yourself into these 7, 10, 14-point holes before the offense has a chance to really respond and put points on the board. So I think if BYU can do that, I think make Josh Hoover, make TCU play from behind, I think you'll be in a good spot and put them in opportunities where they're going to turn the ball over, right? Because it's a team that does it. And when they do it, they don't, they rarely win football games. And I think if BYU can put TCU in an opportunity or in a situation where they're needing to throw against Evan Johnson and needing to throw against, some of the secondary, Tanner Wall playing center field there, like he's at Camden Yards, to speak Jackson's language. If they can put
this is music to my ears.
If they can put TCU offense in that situation, I think BYU can win and win handedly. I think you're looking at a game where, maybe you come away 34-17 victory, and that's what the committee wants to see and what needs to be seen. If you're BYU and you want an opportunity to make the college football playoff as an at-large team, it starts with games like this Saturday and handling business when you're expected to, because you can't keep playing with your food. You can't go to an overtime against an Arizona and expect that when they're splitting hairs between, a Georgia and a BYU or some of these other schools, a Miami or a BYU for the final spot in the college football playoff, and we're looking at non-conference champions. I think they're, brand bias obviously always plays a major factor, but they're going to look at games like this of, did you handle business? And BYU's got to be able to do that and say that they did. So,
yeah, to your earlier point about not starting slow, I feel like especially given the late kickoff, it's going to be a 10 p.m. Eastern time kickoff. You're not going to have most of the committee's eyeballs for much of that game. Like if you kind of sleepwalk through the first half and then go crazy in the second half, but all they see is that first half and they see the final score, I mean, the first half is what's going to stick in their mind, right? Like you got to get off to a good start. You got to have some first quarter activity. Something underrated, like BYU had that streak where they had scored in every quarter since Arizona State last year, and then Arizona snapped it. And that was just such an impressive feat to have that consistency, to have that. I'm having a stroke again. To have that consistency throughout each game and score in each quarter. BYU's got to get back to that where you're scoring early, you're scoring often. It's just, every time you get the ball, you're putting points on the board. And because, like I said earlier, like if you only get a quarter, if these playoff people and these voters are only watching a quarter of your game, and you're not playing great, and then they look at the final score the next day, what they saw is still going to outweigh the final score, right? Like win with style points, but sprinkle those style points in early. You can't play with your food at this stage of the season. It's not in the cards. You have to lock in at this point, BYU. It's time to lock in.
You have to step on Hypnotoad or it'll get you. This is Jackson. You mentioned this kind of earlier as well. As far as like kind of kicking trends, like BYU kicking trends over the last, I looked back while you guys were talking just over the last couple of years. And the thing that really jumps out is that when BYU loses, it tends to come in bunches. Outside of 2020 with the COVID year where they lost to Coastal Carolina and then they won out, like every single year when they dropped a game, they dropped the next one. It was losing to Boise State in 2021 and then following it up with Baylor, and then 2022 they lost to Notre Dame and then they got smoked by Arkansas, and 2023 they lost several games in a row, and then last year it was Kansas, and then right after that Arizona State. So are you going to kick the trend this season? The starting fast, the creating the turnovers, like all these different things are great, but at this point, kind of going off of what I was saying earlier, like how quickly can you get back to your identity, like who you are, what's been successful, what's made you successful up to this point? How quickly can you recenter back to what Kalani's been preaching this entire year, and then just go out and do it? Now, the good news is the creating turnovers and, getting early leads and kind of choking out the rest of the clock by running the football and moving the ball. Like that's all within BYU's DNA. It's just time for them to get back to that. Lubbock was a hiccup. It's over. Like it happened, and we move on. And if you can just settle in, get things going, play the way that you're supposed to play as a BYU football team, like this game, Cincinnati, UCF, like they're all going to take care of themselves, and you put yourself right back into a spot where you get a shot at a title.
It's going to be a doozy of a Saturday. Obviously, the season kind of rides on this BYU football game at 8 p.m. in Provo, Utah. But then we've got a basketball game going on the opposite side of the country, 5 p.m. In Boston, Massachusetts. It's going to be a bit overwhelming for BYU fans to go those 8 hours from basketball.
And BYU media too, because I got to cover all of that.
It's gonna be overwhelming, but what's even more overwhelming is immigration law. And if you've got immigration law questions, don't wait. Talk to Wilner O'Reilly. They've been doing this for 26 years. They've got a former immigration officer on staff, and they help everyone from big names to everyday families get the results they need. They speak 10 languages, offer free consultations, and they're getting real results despite all the noise out there. And here's the best part. If you're a Hype Train listener, your consultation is totally free. Just head to wilneroreilly.com and let them know we sent you. BYU basketball, biggest regular season. So we're not talking NCAA tournament or conference tournament. Biggest regular season basketball game since when?
Since
say,
at
go
San
ahead.
Diego State 2011.
I'm going to say, since. I'm going to say Gonzaga 2019. I guess 2020 at that point.
Yeah, it was February.
BYU 23rd at the time, Gonzaga number 2. I think the San Diego State reference is a great one. I just think we had a game similar to that more recently, but that it's going to be the biggest game in a long time, kind of irregardless. But
it's the first top 10 matchup since they played San Diego State, and that was Jimmer versus Kawhi, like the two of the best players in the country. And now you got AJ, and you got the UConn crowd, and it's a huge brand it's a blue blood versus a new blood, right? Like, it's just, the narratives are endless, and it's AJ going home, and just, this is one of those games, like, if BYU wins, it changes everyone's perspective. Like, all right, I feel like the Gonzaga game, I can see that argument, but at the same time, like, if they hadn't beaten Gonzaga, it's still like, all right, BYU's going to the tournament. They're a fun team to watch. Maybe they can make some damage in March. Whereas if BYU wins this game, it's like, all right, we got to start talking about BYU as a national title contender. I, Mr. AP voter, have to consider putting BYU at number 1 next week. Like, no one was putting BYU at number 1 after they beat Gonzaga. If you beat UConn, you're going to see some of that action.
I mean, you obviously know all the narratives. You've got it's your job to know the narratives. But Gonzaga was the one that came to mind for a moment. I lightly floated out the Kansas last year, but ended up being a Kansas team that stumbled throughout the season, and it was at home for BYU. I don't really think there was a ton on the line as far as like narratives or as far as at championship aspirations go for either of those two teams when BYU absolutely throttled Kansas at the Marriott Center. And when you're talking about it, Trevor, you mentioned BYU was 22 when they took down number 1 Gonzaga. Another one where it's like, it's a great upset, but I don't know if the aspirations were there for that BYU basketball team either. But there are this is a legit championship level test for BYU basketball with championship aspirations, serious championship aspirations for the first time going into a season, maybe ever. Like, obviously, I think there were points of that Jimmer year where we're talking championship, but I don't think going into that season, there was actual narrative surrounding BYU basketball being a legit title contender. I think there is surrounding this team. You're talking about number 3 versus number 7 on an NBA court, the TD Garden, one of the most historic buildings in all of basketball. You got AJ, who grew up in Brockton, 30 minutes from the city of Boston, facing Dan Hurley and the 2-time back-to-back champions from a season ago before Florida won it this last year. It might be the biggest game. I probably would lean again since that Jimmer Kawhi game, maybe in the Marriott Center when the fans rushed the court and you had all those iconic photographs of Jimmer being surrounded like a rock star. I think this game, to your point, Jackson, if BYU were to win this game, were to go on, it's a neutral site. I'm going to say on the road, you're the team that's having to travel 5 hours to Boston, whereas UConn, they're making a couple-hour bus ride up to the city. If you were to go on the road and take down a team like UConn, they're going to get number one votes. They're going to be looked at as a team up there with Purdue and Houston and Duke as like, these are the teams that, we're probably going to see in the Final Four. And I'm hoping that it's a AJ coming out party, for lack of a better term. Obviously, I think everyone in the basketball world knows who AJ Dybantsa is. He's, a likely number one pick in the NBA draft. But I think he's played it a little safe, played it a little reserved these last few games for BYU. He hasn't necessarily taken a lot of shots. He hasn't put out these insane numbers that some of these other top prospects have, because frankly, I don't think he's been asked to and hasn't needed to. But I'm hoping for like a 40-point, at 30 at least, AJ just showing everyone why he was the number one player in the country coming out of high school, taking over this game. He's going to have a lot of family and friends there at the Garden in Boston. And how awesome would it be to see AJ Dybantsa score 40 points on the parquet floor and take down number 3 UConn? It would be the most electric moment, I think, for BYU basketball since we saw Jimmer, putting up these ridiculous stats against Kawhi Leonard and the students rushing the floor.
Yeah, I think the 2 Kansas wins over the past 2 years were like, it was BYU's arrival to the Big 12, right? Like it was, BYU took down the historic powerhouse of the Big 12. It was, hey, BYU's here they're here to create chaos and be a force in the Big 12. But if they beat UConn, like this is their, like BYU deserves to be mentioned as one of the elite basketball programs in the country. They are one of those blue blood teams now. I mean, John Rothstein's BYU tagline this year is "Welcome to the Revolution," and this would be the "Welcome to the Revolution" moment. Like BYU went to Boston and beat UConn. BYU is going to get number one votes. I just got to get out of the way. Unless BYU beats UConn by like 40 points, I'm not voting BYU number one. Just sorry, it's going to be either Purdue or Houston, depending on what they do this week. But I understand why people would put BYU number one. I'm not there yet, even if they beat UConn, but. It's one of those things, though. It's like people are going to be thinking that. People are going to be doing that because BYU's proven they can beat the big boys. They can beat the blue bloods. BYU belongs on that stage, too, because they have guys like AJ Dybantsa that can match up with UConn's talent and their coaching. And so it's a huge opportunity for BYU to step up and maybe put on a statement for the country as the national championship contender and as a program to watch. I mean, they could be – maybe they're the team of the 2020s eventually, and this is step one, right? I mean, this could be a huge stepping stone for BYU on Saturday.
And here's the thing too, like just the aura of this game is going to be off the charts. The Boston Celtics do not have a game between tonight and Sunday, the following day on the 16th, which is at home in the Garden as well. They're going to play the Clippers on Sunday, who play Friday night in Dallas, and then are going to travel that night after the game from Dallas to Boston. So legitimately, I think courtside at that game, you're going to have probably Jason Tatum. You're going to have Jaylen Brown. You're going to have, maybe like Kawhi Leonard and James Harden. Like you're going to have a NBA celebrity row of these superstars who are going to be sitting there, feet on the wood, on the parquet floor, and they're going to be there to watch AJ Dybantsa play basketball. And I think it's going to just be, the environment is going to be awesome. Like I said, like AJ's from there. There's going to be Celtics fans who live in the city who are just coming to the game to see AJ play. I think you're going to obviously get a lot of BYU fans, as you always do. UConn, Connecticut is just state south of Massachusetts, so you're going to get a lot of UConn fans there. I think it's going to be an absolutely insane atmosphere of celebrities, NBA superstars, family and friends of AJ, and then the fans of both schools. It's going to be an awesome game to be at. It's hopefully going to be an awesome game to watch for BYU fans as an appetizer to what is almost a de facto playoff game for BYU in regards to win or go home. It's just going to be quite the evening for BYU and fans across the country.
I love it. It symbolizes a lot of good change for BYU, just like the level in which they're recruiting, the teams in which they're playing. It's one of the things that I'm interested in, speaking of change, is obviously like one of the things that Kevin Young took away from last season was they had a bit of a rocky start starting Big 12 play. He kind of equated that to not really playing anyone in the kind of pre-conference, like preseason games. And he really wanted to step that up this season. Just looking at who UConn's played up to this point, like they kind of have taken the BYU route where they haven't played anybody. And BYU is going to be their first real test. I'm interested to see how they respond versus how BYU responds, given like obviously Holy Cross and Delaware are, not great teams themselves, but BYU has already, gone to a neutral site venue in Vegas and played a Villanova team that I believe, and based off of what, national media is saying, is a team that shows like a lot of promise. Interested to see if it brings kind of an advantage that Kevin Young was looking for even before he gets to conference play. It'll be one of those games that I think BYU fans will remember for a really long time. Not necessarily that they won or that even has anything to do with the outcome, but just rather the fact that this is, as Jackson was saying, this is kind of where the revolution started. Like, this is where I was when BYU started this kind of new era of BYU hoops under Kevin Young.
The American Revolution didn't start too far from Boston. The BYU basketball revolution could start in Boston. I mean, we might as well be calling TD Garden Bunker Hill if the Cougars can pull this one out over UConn. I don't know why I started talking like John Gruden there, but this is the revolution. Got to get that win. Get number
are we gonna? Do we need to throw UConn into the Boston Harbor? Is that what this entails?
BYU fans should be throwing tea in the harbor because that's kind of what the church tells you to do. So,
Jackson said not too far from Boston. It started about a half a mile from the TD Garden.
There we go. I got to brush up on my history.
A lot to predict on Saturday night. A lot of hot takes to give, and the only thing hotter than the takes we're about to give on BYU basketball and BYU football is how hot you're going to look in an Odeon menswear suit. The Elevate suit is incredible, super comfortable. I got mine, of course, in blue, and it is an absolute game changer on Sundays when I have to go to church. Gone are the days where I'm wearing like a white polo with a Lululemon sweater to make it look like I'm wearing a white collared shirt just because I want to be comfortable. Because this suit is 10x the comfort that I had before. So make sure you head over to Odeon Menswear, use the code HYPETRAIN15 for 15% off your order, and be looking as hot as the takes we're about to give. A hot take and score prediction, not only for the BYU football game, as we always do, but also for the BYU UConn basketball game. Jackson, as our guest of honor and the two-time defending Hype Train guest of the year, we'll let you go first.
I'm going for the three-peat, boys. I just need you to know right now. I'm campaigning for the three-peat.
We might have some people that are up our sleeves that might be coming for that crown, but
not going to happen.
We'll see how your predictions hold up this weekend.
Happen. My hot take for this weekend, well, are we talking both games right now, or are we going?
Give me one hot take and score prediction for the basketball game, and then one for the football game.
Okay, a hot take for basketball. I don't know if this is like a hot take, just because it shouldn't be narrative-wise, but like I think AJ is going to go off, but I think BYU loses. I think it'll be like BYU's not going to get killed. They're going to hang around with UConn for a while. Maybe they're leading at halftime. They lose by like 6 or 7, and then. The story from the game is like, okay, AJ Dybantsa is the man. Like this guy is the truth. It's one of those games where like BYU loses, but the winner is AJ, if that makes sense. Where everyone's like, okay, this kid's special. This is the best player in the country. He just went for 35 or 40 at the Garden. Like this is crazy. But like we talked about earlier, BYU's defense, the lack of chemistry thus far, probably comes back to bite him against UConn. But still, the AJ show is just everything, and everyone's just in love with AJ. So that's my basketball prediction. Football score. I guess score prediction for basketball. Let's go 82-75. BYU loses. But like I said, like AJ gets like 40. So it's BYU loses, but it's one of those like you like it's a game that they need to measure themselves up against what they're trying to be. and AJ he pops off the page as the main story. Like it'll be like AJ Dybantsa goes off in BYU loss is like the lead story on ESPN. And then for football, I'm going to say BYU wins 27-17. My hot take, we get 3 interceptions from the defense. Let's say Tanner Wall gets one just because why not? Trey Alexander gets one, and Isaiah Glasgow gets one. BYU wins 27-17. Bear throws for a couple touchdowns. And then BYU gets 3 picks. That's my hot take. And then we're on to Cincinnati.
Jackson just said I'm going for the 3-peat and then just call the BYU loss.
And then said 3 interceptions, and none of them are going to Evan Johnson, who I need to get to 6 on the season.
6?
Not that was my. Oh, you don't even listen to the episodes. This is that. I don't know, Jackson.
I'm glad to miss 1 or 2 here and there.
A 3.
This has been the worst campaign of all time. This has been a worse campaign than Devin Dampier's Heisman campaign.
Jackson just hit Lubbock.
That was like the scene from the campaign where Will Ferrell punches the baby. I'm gonna go basketball. I'm gonna stick with AJ goes for 35. And I'm going to say 11 rebounds. So a 35-point double-double. And I'm going to say BYU gets the victory 82-79. I think they hit their threes. I think they turn the defensive intensity up a notch. And they eke out the victory over UConn. And then for football, I'm going to say we get a bounce back game from our guy, Parker Kingston. I'm going to say 2 receiving touchdowns from Parker Kingston and a 31-17 victory for the Cougs over TCU.
I like it. I'm going to go BYU beating UConn. I'm going to say 82-81. And then Rob Wright goes 20 plus points and then like 25 5-5, if that makes sense. So 20 plus points, 5 or more assists, 5 or more rebounds. I think he's kind of discovering kind of his role and his fit as the point guard for BYU. And I think that all the attention, you've mentioned rightfully so, all the attention is going to be on AJ. And I think just with his kind of game breaking speed, I just think that, and quickness, I think that Rob Wright has himself a game in Boston. As far as TCU, BYU goes, I think this is a get-right game for BYU. I think this is a get-right game specifically for the offense that was just absolutely clamped last week. I think they put up 35, defense holds TCU to 17. And I'm going to say Chase Roberts 2 receiving touchdowns.
If BYU can go 2-0 on Saturday,
yeah, where would that
greatest?
Where would a 2-0 Saturday rank in like great BYU sports days?
Probably up there with Big 12 invite and Utah win, right?
I mean, that's got to be the 1 seed for like a 24-hour period. Like, I'm trying to think of other like football/basketball crossovers. In 2021, they beat Utah at the Huntsman Center the same night they beat USC at the Coliseum to go to 10-2. That was pretty cool. There's probably a day where they got a big football win and there was like a cross country win or something, just because BYU can't stop getting those. I don't know. Just this would, if you beat TCU and you're kind of back in the driver's seat and you can hop back in the top 10 potentially of the CFP, and then you also beat the number 3 team in the country in basketball, like it's hard to beat that kind of action over like a 6-8 hour period.
Yeah, I think the invite and beating Utah is obviously the easy answer, but if we're talking about 2 on the field, like between the lines, accomplishments on the same day, it's obviously, I think it has to be football and basketball, and that basically gives you like a 1 month time frame for it to have happened. And there's not a lot of basketball games that are going on early enough where we're probably looking at this as number 1. Like,
got another possibility. BYU 2022, they beat Utah at home. It was it was Dallin Hall and Richie Saunders freshman year. They weren't supposed to beat Utah. Utah was playing well. They get the win at the Marriott Center. And then that night, the legend of Sol-J Maeva Peters defeats SMU in the New Mexico Bowl. And then he posts one of the greatest Instagram posts of all time. If you know, you know. Just
the power of a basketball jersey.
The power of a basketball jersey.
Either way, Jackson, thank you for joining us. Despite a rocky ending there in the previews and hot takes, you are in the driver's seat for a three-peat of the Hype Train Guest of the Year. So thank you, as always, for taking, in the 90 minutes out of your day to join us and lend some credibility to this shenanigan. So we appreciate it, as always. And until we talk to you again next week, we've got a big Saturday, and it's always Cougs by a billion.
Go Cougs.